I think maybe Martin. All right. Welcome, everyone. Uh, Hello. I'm assuming you can hear me. So, welcome. My name is Purang Irani. I'm a professor in computer science at the University of Manitoba in the Faculty of Science. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, the Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. It is my utmost pleasure to welcome Mr. Martin Cooper on behalf of the Faculty of Science and the University of Manitoba. I was personally honored to have met Dr. Cooper in 2016 when he visited Winnipeg and gave a talk here at Tech Manitoba. And ever since I've introduced my mobile HCI course at the University of Manitoba I think in 2003, I have been talking about the inventions of the Dynatech that Dr. Cooper will talk about today and has been instrumental in the development of it. So Martin Cooper conceived of the portable cellular phone and led the team that created the first phone in 1973. He has contributed to the technology in wireless communications industries for over 60 years as an inventor, as an entrepreneur, and executive. He contributed to every significant advancement in wireless communications during this time. His teams introduced the first nationwide car phones and radio pagers, the first digitally trunked land mobile dispatch system, as well as the portable optimized cellular phone system. He's known as the father of the handheld cellular phone. During his 29-year tenure with Motorola, Cooper was a division manager and served as corporate director of R&D. Subsequently, he started several businesses, including Cellular Business Systems, which he led to dominate the US cellular billing industry in the 1980s, as well as Arraycom, which became a world leader in smart antenna technology. His wife, Arlene Harris, and Cooper co-founded Great Call Inc., maker of the Jitterbug phone and service. Today, Cooper is chairman and co-founder of Dyna LLC, an entrepreneurial incubator. He has served on the boards of directors of several public and private companies. Cooper serves on the Federal Communications Commission Technological Advisory Council, and he has been granted 11 patents and is widely published in the fields of communication. He holds a BSc and an MSc in electrical engineering from the Illinois Institute of Technology, on whose board of trustees he serves. He has received honorary doctorate degrees from several universities, including the Illinois Institute of Technology, Strathclyde University in Scotland, Hasselt University in Belgium, and Inha University in Korea. He has had tremendous accomplishments in the field and has been recognized through multiple awards, including the Charles Draper Award and the Marconi Prize. It is a great pleasure that I introduce you again, Dr. Cooper, and we give the floor to you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy. It's an honor and a pleasure to address this group. I have a warm spot in my heart for Winnipeg. My early days, my most formative days, were as a child in Winnipeg. But I must tell you that it was a very different Winnipeg than you are familiar with, because I have visited Winnipeg many times more recently. The Winnipeg that I knew as a child, as an example, in the wintertime there were no snowplows, so we ice skated on the streets. And the milkman who delivered the milk on a horse-drawn sled uh, 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 had no trouble delivering the milk because his horse knew exactly where to stop at every stop. So it was a very different world. What's unique about Winnipeg, however, is that some of the aspects of Winnipeg are both modern and exciting and interesting, and others are exactly as they were almost 90 years ago when I was there. Winnipeg is a wonderful city, and if you would only get rid of winter, it would be just perfect. So, what I'd like to talk to you about today uh, is about the cell phone. A little bit about why the cell phone was introduced, what was the purpose, how it almost didn't happen, how the cell phone is being used today in ways that you may not be aware of, and how it really has transformed the world in these unique ways. I'm going to try not to talk too long. I'm really more interested in knowing what you want to hear about. I'm an engineer. I know that your expertise, or at least as the invitation states, is computer science. I have a great interest in computer science, obviously, but I'm a wireless guy, and that's been my passion for the for my entire career. So let me start by talking about the conflict that generated what the cell phone is today. And the conflict was between an organization that called the Bell System, who had created a concept called cellular telephony. The principle was very simple. It involved reuse of the spectrum by using small cells instead of having a transmitter covering an entire city. They had a memorandum written in 1947 by a fellow named Doug Ring at Bell Laboratories. By the 1960s, the Bell System decided to execute on this memorandum, and they made a proposal to our Federal Communications Commission to create such a system. They were not very optimistic about how pervasive the system would be. Their anticipation was that ultimately there might be 1 million cell phones in the world. And their definition of a cell phone was a car phone. I was with a small company relative to the Bell System. The Bell System, it was the largest company in the world by every measure, number of people, revenues, profitability, and they were a monopoly, at least in the United States and in Canada, as a matter of fact. So the Bell System, understanding that this was not going to be a very good market, they suggested that the only way to prosecute this technology was for there to be a monopoly. There really was not room for more than one company to do this. And their interpretation of communications for people was car phones. We at Motorola disagreed with them. Our view of the car phone was that it was archaic. That what people want is the ability, the freedom to be able to communicate anywhere and at any time. We observed that historically the Bell System had created a system that connected one place to another place. Our interpretation of where the world was going was that it was a person-to-person conversation that was appropriate. And so we took them on. We presented our viewpoints to the FCC. In 1973, we discovered, by the end of 1972, that the FCC was about to make a decision, and we were not sure that they were going to make the right decision. And it was at that point when I decided that the only way that we were going to persuade people of our position was to really demonstrate that the way to go in the future was with a personal handheld telephone. So what we had now was the Bell System in their very organized way, in the very monopolistic way, suggesting that they knew exactly what people wanted, and Motorola having the passion to know that the freedom to communicate everywhere and at any time would be achieved only with a personal handheld phone. And that's when we undertook to build such a phone. I happen to have a model of that phone here. For those of you that are watching, you could see that this was a little bit bigger than a modern cell phone, although was not our intent. But these were primitive times, even in 1972 and 1973. Believe it or not, there was no internet. There were no personal computers. The integrated circuit had just been invented. There were a few in use, and we used that. But this device really comprised a lot of individual parts, all handheld, hand soldered together, and we were never really sure this thing was going to work for more than a few minutes at a time, but we did manage to get something working. This phone could only do two things: talk and listen. Didn't have any other capabilities, and had a battery life of perhaps 25 minutes or so. It weighed about a kilo, close to 2.5 pounds, and that was not a problem, the battery life of 25 minutes, because you couldn't hold this heavy thing up for more than 25 minutes. But it worked. And whether it was a cell phone, a demonstration, or the position that we took being just the right one, we prevailed. It took 10 years for this demonstration to be turned into a commercial system. In 1983, the first commercial phones were introduced. Most of them were, in fact, car telephones, but a system in Washington, D.C., in fact, had portable telephones very similar to the one that I just showed you, that weighed only a pound or pound and a half, and that was the beginning of what cellular telephony is. Today, you're all aware of the fact that there are more cell phones in the world than there are people. There are some 5.5 million, probably closer to 6 million people in the world that use cell phones today, and so the cell phone has become pervasive. It's my view that the cell phone has transformed people. People behave differently today than they did before the cell phone was present. That difference in behavior has manifested itself differently in different places. Believe it or not, the biggest impact of the cell phone has been in emergent countries, not in advanced countries like Canada and the US, but in places like Africa, India, Mexico, where people use cell phones for very fundamental things. In Africa, as an example, just the ability to be able to save money, to transfer money from one place to another, the commerce that the cell phone engendered, lifted over 1 billion people out of severe poverty into a much better situation, living situation. Over 1 billion people moved out of severe poverty. In India, in Mexico, there are villages that now have access to medical services because they have devices that attach to a cell phone that permit a doctor in Mexico City to do an eye examination to somebody in a remote village. Young pregnant women in Tijuana, as an example, can have an ultrasound done by a doctor in Mexico City, once again using the cell phone as the communication device and with a very simple, inexpensive sensor to actually perform this thing. So, and in India, there's a whole new level of commerce that has occurred where typically a woman in a remote village will take a loan out, a micro loan. She'll get a cell phone. She'll rent her cell phone out by the minute to local farmers or local fishermen. These people will call around the neighboring areas, find out where they can get the best prices for their food, for their fish or uh, products, produce, and their level of prosperity has improved. So those are the places that have really manifested the greatest effects of the cell phone. But we're only at the beginning. First of all, the cell phone is a suboptimal device. I'm really not very happy about it. Just think about it. The cell phone I happen to be using at the moment an iPhone. I use whatever phone is the latest, hottest phone. Uh, but making a phone call is taking a flat piece of plastic, put it against my head, holding my arm up in a very uncomfortable position. Clearly, making phone calls is not optimized, and you know what an optimum phone would look like. Ultimately, I think the phone's going to be a chip embedded under your skin, possibly close to your ear. In the interim, maybe it'll be an earring or a button on your ear. And when you want to make a phone call, you will say, "Computer, get me Dr. Irani in Canada," and the next thing you know, I will be talking to Pareg. That to me is an optimum phone. The cell phone is certainly not an optimum visual device. Imagine looking at this tiny screen when you can sit at home and watch a 65-inch screen. And we know we can solve that problem as well. And the other thing that I object to with cell phones is that we are assuming that one device, a device that does all things for all people, can serve all of the different kinds of people in the world. Well, you know that just doesn't make sense. Every one of us is different from every other one of us, and the idea that a single device will serve each of us optimally, it doesn't make sense at all. And by the way the existing manufacturers think they have solved that problem, they've told us, well, that's simple. You can customize your phone. You can make it your phone. All you have to do is select among 2 million applications and pick the ones that are right for you. That I would hope that you would agree with me is ridiculous, although some of you probably are a lot smarter than I am and have figured out exactly what apps you need. The phone of the future, in my view, and I'd like to hear what your view is a device that contains an artificial intelligence that analyzes us, that looks at our behavior, and either develops the apps or finds an app that is suitable to solve our problems. The cell phone will not be a single device like this. It will be a device that is distributed on our bodies to solve what our specific problems are. Where are these problems going to help us? They're going to help us in healthcare. There is the potential for a device to measure things in our body and to determine, to anticipate disease, to figure out when we are moving in the direction of coming down with a medical problem, anticipate that problem, and solve it before it becomes a disease. There is the potential that a derivative of the cell phone will actually someday eliminate disease. The cell phone has the potential to revolutionize education. Our education process is archaic. It does not take advantage of the fact that every individual now has the potential, with the presence of the internet, to access all the knowledge in the world. The educational system in many places, I hope that's true in Winnipeg as it is where I live here in Del Mar, California. There are experiments being conducted now in what's called a flipped classroom, where students learn in their own ways outside of school, and the purpose of school is primarily to counsel. The whole concept of what a teacher does is changing, to teach people how to learn and not to try to uh, place a whole bunch of different people in a single room and try to educate them with exactly the same method. And that method usually is a lecture, which unfortunately is what I'm doing to you, which makes it clear that I'm really not educating you very effectively. So there is a potential to revolutionize education. But the biggest impact of the cell phone is already happening now, and it's the ability to allow us to collaborate. We all know that two minds are more effective than a single mind, and that will continue to happen. So the only other comment that I want to make before I open the floor for questions is the issue of spectrum. If what I say is correct, and that is that the cell phone is going to revolutionize the way we do all these things, clearly we have to provide this service to everybody. Cell phone service in the future is no longer optional. It has to be treated as essential. There has to be a way for us to provide service to everyone. That is not the case today. In the U.S., I don't have the statistics for Canada, but in the U.S., as many as 40% of the population do not have access to wireless broadband. Can you imagine a situation, just to look at education alone, where we educate 60% of our population use these new tools, we challenge their minds, we get more connections to their brains, they are smarter people, and the other 40% of our population don't have access to these things. That's unacceptable. There has to be a way to serve everybody. The technology exists to do that, and this is a role that the government has to take on to stimulate that from happening. Parag didn't mention, so I have to do a commercial. I just introduced a book that is called, I have to remind myself what my book is called, Cutting the Cord. The cell phone has transformed humanity. And I address this issue of education and of how we are going to serve everybody. And it is by addressing this as a unique problem. The industry, the wireless industry, has moved in a direction that we call 5G. 5G is just an incremental improvement over earlier versions, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G. But unfortunately, the focus of 5G is what's called the Internet of Things. This is going to improve a lot of services in the future, but those services don't exist today. Before we do the Internet of Things, it's my view that we haven't finished yet with the Internet of People. We have to figure out how to provide wireless service to everybody so they could get the benefits of education, healthcare, and collaboration. I think this is a good time to open the floor to questions, and I hope I've stimulated some questions, and I hope there are some people that don't agree with me, so we can have an interesting conversation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cooper. I really appreciate your insights, and I should have said earlier on that yes, I totally enjoyed reading your book, Cutting the Cord. I highly recommend it. In fact, I've ordered a couple of copies for colleagues that I know, and I recommend it to everyone in the industry, to those who are running teams, research labs. It's a riveting description of those early years at Motorola and your process of developing the cell phone and all the experiences. It's filled with humor, and I really enjoyed it. I couldn't put it down. So we'll have questions for those who are just joining in. The questions can be reached at, or can you can answer questions. You can ask questions on Slido.com with the event code F837. You also have a button to upvote certain questions that you like, so that we can address them. So we'll do a balance. I have a number of questions myself, but also I'll have some questions coming from the audience, and so we'll take them there. And so we'll start off with the first question that we see on the screen. Marty, is what developments in mobile that you see now have surprised you the most?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that it's very hard to surprise me because I'm an advocate of science fiction, and I think anything is possible. I'm also, if you haven't figured it out by now, I'm an optimist. So I think all these things are not only unsurprising, but I think they're going to happen. But the most interesting thing that has affected my professional viewpoint as well as my interest and emotions has been the concept of smart antennas, the ability to make use of the fact that it's possible to create a number of sensors. As you know, human beings have two ears. They hear better because they have two ears, because you have two copies of the information that comes to you audibly, and you can process, your brain processes those two copies in a very effective way to let you hear better. Well, with the radio technology, we're not constrained to only two antennas. We can have multiples, and we could have as many as 100. And when you combine the signals for multiple antennas like this, you multiply the capacity of the radio spectrum. And what surprised me is that this technology is going to let us do exactly what I suggested before. It'll let us serve everybody in a country and in the world, for that matter, and do that at very low cost. So you're going to have to get somebody to loan you a copy of the book to get the details of that. But smart antennas are great. You should know, however, as I mentioned before, when we introduced the first cell phone, the internet didn't even exist. These were really primitive times, so I've had a lot of new technologies to both surprise me and to interest me and to make my life very productive.
Okay, thank
So
you.
somebody asks, how can we decrease our dependence? Why? On the cell phone, I can't imagine why you would even ask that. The cell phone sets you free. It lets it, and it will do more of that in the future. It takes away the necessity for you to do all kinds of ordinary things and focus it on things that only the human brain can do. So I don't see the cell phone as being an annoyance. I see it as being a way to expand the human mind and to increase our ability to accomplish things. So I'm sorry to
Yeah, yeah.
disagree with whoever.
Thank you. And so I think also in your book. Oh, sorry, you're muted now.
I have on my screen, I have the questions. You want me to wait for you to ask a question?
Sure, sure. I will be asking a question and maybe fill in some of these other ones, Martin, if that's okay.
Omar Kasi asked me
Good.
what the technical hurdles that we encountered that, that, that we didn't know about. It turns out the biggest problems were squeezing all of this technology into a very small box because, at least at the beginning, uh, we didn't have the computing power to do the kinds of things that we're doing today. I think you know that the fact that the processor in a modern cell phone contains in excess of 2 billion transistors. When we built the first cell phone, there were actually individual transistors that were part of this product. The one device that was a challenge was a typical cell phone today has access to many thousands of radio channels. The first cell phone had access to 400, and even that took a synthesizer that was, in fact, an integrated circuit. So the biggest challenge was allowing us to do what we call duplex transmission, be able to talk and listen at the same time. Every one of these things is a major challenge. Fortunately, we had been anticipating these kinds of challenges, and I would wander around the laboratories at Motorola, encouraging people, understanding what they were doing, and so when the time came to actually demonstrate a working personal portable phone, we accumulated all these individual technologies. It took a crew of over 20 people, 3 months working day and night to put all these things together. But as you see, we did succeed, and in fact, the cell phone influenced our Federal Communications Commission to, first of all, allow portable telephony, and second of all, the most important thing they did was require that the cell phone industry be competitive, and that has been a crucial element in the future.
I'll ask a question, Marty. I think in your book you talk at length about, I really enjoyed the chapter you talk about when you give your demonstration in 1973 on April 3rd, the Dynattack, and the length at which you had to go to give this demonstration, and it was quite an experience. Um, I believe in part of the demonstration was, like you say, to demonstrate that you are competitive, that there's a competitive space, and that Motorola has a big role to play in this competitive space. Uh, and one of the issues in terms of these hurdles, you also talk about the issue of spectrum management. How do you see that going forward in terms of spectrum management and these concerns of you know optimizing the space and the spectrum that we have currently?
No, that's an excellent question. There is a myth in our industry that the spectrum is like beachfront property. That there's only so much spectrum, and when that's used up, there won't be any more. Think about how ridiculous that thought is when, if you think about the beginnings of, of radio communications, Marconi is credited with first commercializing radio, and that happened around 1900 or so. And he used the entire radio spectrum to for one communications path, and that communication path was at 1 bit every 6 seconds, if you could imagine that. Today, we are communicating at the capacity of the radio spectrum has increased over what Marconi did by something like 10 trillion times. Roughly the same amount of spectrum, 10 trillion times the improvement. And the way that's been done is by a whole bunch of techniques that involve reuse of the radio spectrum, a more efficient transmission, and we have yet to accommodate all of the techniques that are possible because we manage the spectrum in the most horrible, inefficient ways. We give people a carrier, we will give a license to use the spectrum in whatever way they want and for an exclusive use. Exclusive means only they use that piece of spectrum, and it doesn't make any sense at all. The way the spectrum will be managed in the future is spectrum will be shared. When anybody wants to conduct a transaction, whether it's a video conference, a telephone conversation, a data message between two devices, that transaction will occur with the minimum amount of spectrum over the minimum area with the minimum amount of power over the ideal frequency band. If we could accomplish that, and you know that that can be accomplished, that is only a matter of system engineering. A lot of that engineering has yet to be done, but most of it, but all of it is known. If that happens, the capacity of the spectrum will include by another trillion times or so. So there's going to be lots and lots of capacity. From the standpoint of spectrum, that is the biggest challenge for the future, and it's a challenge that we absolutely understand today.
Okay, okay. We have another
We have another
question.
question.
There's a question here about should we invest in satellite networks to expand coverage? I think you're all aware of the fact that there are numerous satellite networks in operation today, and many more are going up. The question is, are these satellite networks going to be economic and useful? Certainly, they are going to be useful for some people. The question is whether the applications exist that make them economic. You know that the very first satellite system that was intended to do this was a failure. Iridium is still in existence, and it is used for very specific purposes. What I believe will happen in the future is that different satellite networks, different terrestrial networks will evolve that will solve specific problems. I believe, as an example, that solving the digital divide in education, the fact that a large percentage of our population is getting a better education than the rest of the population because they have access to wireless communications, that solution is not going to be 5G alone. It's going to be a combination of perhaps 5G in the big cities, a unique system that is focused on covering wide areas at low cost for the urban areas, and perhaps in the uh, most low density urban areas, perhaps satellite communications are right. The purpose of technology is to serve the needs of people. My definition of technology is the application of science to create products and services that make people's lives better. And if it doesn't involve people, it's a curiosity. It's not technology. And so the function of engineers, of scientists, is not to create science for the sake of science alone, to create products and technology for the sake of technology. It's to solve people's problems. That's the starting point. And when you do that, you find out that there are different technologies that will solve different problems. This concept of building billions of cell phones, all identical, so that you have economies of scale. We have a concept called economies of specialization that allow you to serve unique segments of society in optimal ways that also end up being economic.
Thank you. Can I follow that up with another question, Martin? And you say, you know, the intent of technology is to solve users' needs. In your book, you actually refer to this, the idea of Motorola being so good at understanding the user's need, and that was part of the reason why you were able to beat AT&T at the portable cellular phone when AT&T was working on the automobile cellular phone and advancing that technology. What advice or what recommendations do you give to folks who are trying to understand users' need, who are trying to understand, you know, what are the true needs that people, need to have solved today, and to then build technologies that adapt to that. Obviously, we are not our best users. We all have different needs, so we cannot just probe ourselves or have a session of self-inquiry. But it's something where you need to look broader. You need to have a vision, and I think you had a lot of that at the time, but in hindsight, what are some of the lessons you could give people in terms of trying to understand what are the users' needs?
Well, I think Ferenc, there's no magic bullet, but I hope that I made the point that understanding the problem from the standpoint of of people is the most important thing in productization. I'm not talking now about research, although research also, in at least in some places, has to be focused. But truly understanding the nature of what the problem you're solving turns out to be the most important issue. And the way we solved that when I first joined the product teams at Motorola, the very first thing that all of us did was we had mobile phones in our cars, and every morning and every afternoon and during the day we would be testing the new concepts, trying to behave like our customers behaved. Turns out to be a very important kind of thing. We have to start out looking at technologies. It's what is the human problem, and then attack the the technology, and that was really the basis of why we ended up prevailing over the Bell system. We had the passion, the understanding what human needs were. The Bell system was operating in their typical way, which was the reverse of the normal process. They started out with the people in the laboratory, came up with a new idea. They evolved this idea into a product. They turned that over to their manufacturing monopoly, which was called Western Electric. And Western Electric would manufacture the products. They would turn it over to the operating companies, and the operating companies would come to you, every one of you, and say, this is what you want. Exactly backwards from what the process should be. The process should start out with what the human needs are. How do you improve the state of humanity and work in the other direction?
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next
The next
question.
question.
Somebody asks about the psychosocial effects on intelligence and individuality. Well, I hope I've answered that already. I think that the cell phone, as it evolves, is going to allow us, first of all, to achieve more, to be smarter, and to be more individual. Because the thing that expresses our individuality is our thinking ability. And at the moment, especially historically, but certainly now, we spend a great deal of time doing things that are routine, that don't take a lot of intelligence, that don't express our individuality. The cell phone, and if there's anything that my audience could do is figure out a way so we have a new name for what this device is instead of cell phone. Because if you think about it, most people don't know what the word cell means in this context, and it's certainly not just a phone. But what this device is going to do is set people free. It's going to allow them to express themselves. It's going to make them richer. It's going to make them smarter, and it's going to make them healthier. So are there some negative effects? Yeah, I think we're witnessing that. The most negative manifestation that I've seen are the people that have their heads buried in their cell phone as they cross the street, and knowing what our drivers are like, they are risking their lives. But remember now, this thing we call the cell phone is a relatively new phenomenon. It's only been around for one generation. We're still learning how to use it. We're still getting a feel for what the capabilities of this device are and how to use it in an optimal way. So yes, there are problems, but people are smart enough to figure those things out, and we are going to do that.
Your next
The next
question.
question.
Somebody asks what can be improved with modern science. I hope that I've covered that. Everything. We have to start out with improving coverage. We have to be able to make sure that everybody in the world has access to all these wonderful capabilities, uh, we have to make it affordable. There, there, there should be no reason why any individual, should not be able to afford to have access to and to afford these kinds of communication. So those are the most things that have to be improved. The second thing, and I've already expressed that, but I'll say it differently. The cell phone has to accommodate the human physiognomy, the human ways of doing things. It cannot be what somebody in the laboratory says is what a phone has to be. A piece of plastic that's shaped in the way that's either easy to manufacture or solves somebody's unique problem. We have to, the phone has to be adapted to human beings, and that is going to be a multi-generational problem, but we are going to see significant improvements. And one thing that I would point out to you, that those of you that have been involved in cell phone technology, that we have pretty much reached the end of how many megapixels, how small you can make a telephone, all of these things that have allowed the manufacturers to convince us that we need a new, different phone every year. They've pretty much reached the limit. They're going to have to figure out how to do more useful things for us instead of having more megapixels, more megahertz, and smaller size.
Thank you. Thank you.
Somebody asked did Steve Jobs thank me for saving Apple. You're quite right that Steve Jobs did save Apple. I don't care for Steve Jobs as an individual, but he did address this problem of the human interface. I think that was an extraordinary contribution, and Steve Jobs is to be credited for having done that. On the other hand, the one thing that Steve Jobs was not sensitive to was the issue that I mentioned before, that every one of us is different than every other one of us, and the personalization, the customization of cell phones is something that has not yet been addressed in a way that I consider to be meaningful, and that is a great opportunity for the future. The question from Latif Karimi, do I expect a revolution in cell phone that will change from something to hold, carry a handle to a device placed inside the body? Well, I already mentioned that it makes a great deal of sense to me to put at least the phone part in the body so that it can interface with our human sensors. And it solves another problem. If you think of one of the functions of our body, it's to convert energy. We consume food. Our body has figured out how to get food and convert it to energy. Wouldn't it be nice if we could embed these devices of the future in our body and use the body as the energy source? But we don't have to do that for a generation or two. The evolution of the cell phone, I think, is going to be that we're going to have a device on our bodies that connects us with the rest of the world, a conduit to the world. And then we'll have multiple inputs to that conduit. If the phone that you want, then you'll have an Optimum phone that I described to you before that may in fact be embedded behind your ear. If it's a health device, you may have devices. There are already devices in the market that will allow you to measure, to be sensitive to things like heart failure due to lung congestion. There is a patch that you can put on your body that will, through using this conduit that I refer to, that will sense whether you are about to have a heart attack if you're prone to that kind of disease. And having done that, anticipating the fact that you're going to get a heart attack, you can treat the heart attack, give you a pill, give you some kind of a medication that keeps you from dying. That principle applied to the various diseases that we are subject to has the potential. It's not going to happen for one generation or two, but sometime in the future, this device that we carry with us, this combination of devices, will be able to sense virtually every disease, and the whole concept of disease will be eliminated. So it's going to happen a long. It's going to take a long for all these things to happen a long time, but they are going to happen. And who's going to do that? Well, it's going to start out with research that's done mostly in our universities that creates the basic science. It's going to be done by companies who believe in understanding what people's problems are and in solving those problems. Now, Mr. Anonymous, well, you have a lot of people named Anonymous in Winnipeg.
That's
How do we convince conspiracy theorists and other skeptics that radiation from cell phones and cell towers is not a health risk? You know, Anonymous, I've been working on that problem for well over 60 years, and I have not figured it out yet. We started out well over 60 years ago by because we were worried about it. We had just come up with the concept of a handheld radio that would be transmitting, and we were worried about the fact that it would affect human beings. And we created a whole bunch of handheld phone devices strapped into the heads of 30 pigs, because the physiognomy of pigs is very close to human beings. And we set these things up to transmit in a routine way, many times more than would be for human beings. After some period of months, they slaughter the pigs, look for changes in the brain and any place else. It was a very elementary way of attacking the problem. But since then, there have been literally thousands of studies done to try to find out if there's any effect on the human brain, on the human body, other than just plain simple heating. And so far, there haven't been any credible studies that have demonstrated that. And the amount of heating that you get from the power that comes up from a cell phone or from a tower that may be dozens or hundreds of feet away from you is insignificant. You get many times more increase in power radiated into your body when you walk out into the sunshine than you do from a cell phone. That's all logic. When you talk about conspiracy theorists, unfortunately, there's just no way of getting to them. What you do find out, however, is that even the conspiracy theorists can't get along without their cell phones. So maybe that's the solution. We are going to make it impossible for a person to benefit from the cell phone and still believe that cell phone radiation is going to cause them a problem. Shall I keep going, Brian?
Yes, please. Yes.
And,
A few more minutes left, so we can take this last question, and if you have any ending comments, we can maybe address those. But maybe this can be a last question.
somebody who is blessed with the same name as I have, Martin, he wants to know if these next generation phones are going to be like science fiction, see-through clear communications, holographs, and much more. You know the answer to that question, Martin. And the answer is it's only a question of bandwidth. If you have enough bandwidth, you can reproduce everything, not only the voice with fidelity that you could never that exceed anything that you could be sensitive to. You could provide enough pixels so that you couldn't tell the difference between a real image and an artificial one, uh, and of course holographs can be done. So we are in fact in some future generation going to have augmented reality, virtual reality, whatever you want to talk about. It's going to take a lot of technological improvement of the kinds that I talk about, but it really is just a matter of bandwidth. How much information can you economically move from one place to another? Ultimately, is going to happen. It's not likely that we're going to have. It's certainly not in my generation. We're not going to have holographs, but those of you who are younger are going to be experiencing holographic communications at some point in your lifetime. That's my prediction. Somebody wants to know how to get in touch with me with further to conversation. Of course, I'm willing to share my email address. I'm not sure, Parag, how many people are on this besides your students and faculty,
We have
but
we have 130 people online apparently, Marty.
if you reach out to Parag, he will give you my email address, and I'd be happy to talk to you. Uh, there is a cell site that is martycooper.com. At some point, we're going to figure out how to be able to have people address me on that cell site. My the our the company that my wife and I operate from is called Dyna LLC, and if you go to dynallc.com, dynallc.com, there is a page that allows you to contact me. And there are also are some papers that I've written that you might find interesting. And if your children are have projects at school where they want to talk about the invention of the cell phone as their project, we've got a frequently asked question page that will give them lots of information that they can use as the basis for their school presentation. So the one way that I stay alive today is to stay in contact with people who stimulate me. Dr. Irani has been doing that in our very short relationship, and I'm grateful for that. And anybody that wants to stimulate me in some way, welcome.
As you know, I have many questions for you, Marty, but I see that there are several other questions from the audience today. So we'll take maybe a couple more that will extend our time, and then I'll end with some concluding remarks, and I'll also let Dr. Cooper end with some concluding remarks. So here's one more question, and then a second one, and then perhaps.
Good. Well, I have all the time in the world, but I know you guys don't. What about interplanetary conversation? When you have delays due to the sheer distance between the planets, well, that's not my problem. I, uh, well, maybe it is. Every once in a while I get a question like this where I actually have to spend a minute to think about it. You know what? I think we're going to solve that problem. The people tell me that quantum entanglement is not usable for communications, and I think perhaps that's a presumptuous comment. If in fact you could use entanglement, and I think you're all aware of what that involves, if you have an atomic particle that has certain characteristics, and these you have two particles that are remotely located, somehow or other they can synchronize. If that is true, there has to be some version of that that will allow us to have instantaneous communications over space. And then you'll get into a whole different problem, like who is it that you're talking to on these other planets? And we haven't yet found anybody alive on other planets, even in our own system. We open up to a whole new area of thought that is way beyond engineering and is more the province of science fiction, which I absolutely love. But we engineers are not going to solve that problem for a long time.
And then we'll take one.
Somebody asked the question about Big Brother, and another guy named Anonymous. Wow. There are two issues with regard to Big Brother. And by the way, this is probably the most important question that was asked in this entire conversation that we're having. Security and privacy. Those are the two issues. Both of them are under attack. Both of them are very serious problems, and both of them can be solved, but we have not yet seriously taken solve them. Security more so than privacy, but even with security, I think you read that in your papers every week. It sounds like somebody's system has been breached. I know that that's going to be solved. That is a scientific problem. We know how to create cryptography that is essentially unbreakable. We haven't yet created systems that involve both people and machines that are that prevent breaches of the kind you've read about. But we're going to figure that out. The real problem that is harder to figure out is privacy. How can you have free communications between people and still preserve privacy? We haven't yet convinced people that privacy is important. Think about it. I would suggest that every one of you thinks that you're getting free service from Google, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and all these things. I've got news to you. None of those services are free. Every one of those services is trading on your privacy. They are accumulating information about you, Mr. Anonymous, you, every other individual that I'm fortunate enough to be talking to. They're taking information about you that has value, and in exchange, they're giving you a browser. They're giving you the ability to talk to other people. The question is, are you getting a fair shake on it? Well, if you are comfortable giving away your privacy, then you're getting a fair deal. But shouldn't you be in control? There are proposals that will pay you for the privacy that you're giving up, that will pay you for information about yourself, and allow you to pay for the information, for the systems, for the capabilities that you need. I think that's the direction we have to move in, but at the moment, a big hunk of humanity is accepting the fact that privacy is not very important. You can know everything you want about me, and I don't mind at all. As long as you, and I'm pointing at every one of you, feel that way, we're not going to solve the privacy problem. There are people working on that, and in fact, my wife has started a company called Rethink, WRETHINK, that hopes to address this problem by providing people with a vault in which all of their personal information is located, and allows them to make that information available to others only when they permit that to happen, and allows them to reach out for that information in the most efficient ways possible, but to pay for that service. And if my wife is successful, at least some subset of humanity will have a way of addressing at least parts of the privacy problem, but I hope I have generated enough curiosity on your part to think about whether you really care about your privacy.
Thank you. Thank you. And on that note, I'd like to end by thanking you so much for being here present with us on the Faculty of Science Virtual Speaker Series. Dr. Cooper, has been a real pleasure. It's been a pleasure interacting with you over the last couple of weeks. And I look forward to further exchanges. I also apologize and thank the audience for being here, first of all, but apologize for not being able to address all the questions you may have had. I hope you get another opportunity. And for the sake of time, unfortunately, I would like to end this here. So again, thank you, and I may leave maybe a few more minutes for you to have some concluding remarks, Dr. Cooper.
Well, it was my honor and pleasure to be here, and I'm sincere. If anybody reaches out to me, and whether it's by email or through our website, I promise you that I will get back to you as long as you're pleasant to me. You could disagree with me, but I hope you do it pleasantly. Thank you very much, everybody, for being so attentive and for inviting me here.
Thank you. And one more to again announce Dr. Cooper's book, Cutting the Cord. The link is on the Slido webpage. It's definitely a great read, so I encourage you all to get a copy wherever you can. Thank you. Thanks again. Bye now.